All right, so we're looking at overcoming some more involved issues than the other ones we've looked at so far. We're going to look at addiction to pornography, and then talk a little bit about abortion. So, with addiction, you can look at your handout on page 10. There are a bunch of different things that need to be addressed. Sometimes the way that these things get addressed isn't really getting to the roots of the issues, and so things just continue. But working through addiction is often a process, and so it involves processing, practicing, and praying through things with God and accountability with others until total victory is reached. And as we know, staying in those accountability relationships is an important part of that. So the first thing that we are going to look at is an addictive lifestyle. Looking at that first graphic there on page 10, often when there is an addiction, the first thing that happens is in the cycle of doing the addictive behavior, first someone starts to fantasize about it. They think, oh, yeah, the temptation of doing that thing gets into their mind, and they start entertaining that fantasy. Then they go into some type of ritual, something that prepares them for the event. It may be buying something, preparing something, going somewhere, whatever that ritual is. And then they do the actual activity, and then they try to keep the lid on. They try to keep things all together and make it not impact things too much or not be known. And then they go back into further shame and guilt. And that further shame and guilt, as we'll see, feeds some of these other roots and mindsets. Usually people wait to invite God in until that part of the further shame and guilt. And that's when they're like, oh, I need help. But it just becomes part of the cycle. Instead, inviting God in to help with the initial feelings in the fantasy stage, in the destructive core concepts, and in the addictive lifestyle, and the addictive cloak are really helpful. So let's look at those. So first, an example of inviting God into the fantasy. Let's say your addiction is to food, and so you're thinking about that bag of chips that's upstairs, and it just starts feeling more and more wonderful, and then you start picturing, okay, I'm going to go up there, and here's how I'm going to prep, here's how I'm going to make it so nobody knows I'm doing this, and so on. So if you invite God in to the memory of that, the last time I thought about that bag of chips and I started to fantasize, God, where were you? What was I feeling and believing? And I invite you in. And it's really, really interesting. One person I prayed with, God, revealed what that food really looked like, that it wasn't as wonderful as it seemed. We asked God to strip away any cloak of deception over it. And it went from looking attractive to not looking attractive. God works in all kinds of different ways. Often the fantasy we're more susceptible to when these destructive core concepts are bothering us or are triggered in some way. For example, something happens and we feel worthless or unlovable or alone. Or we can also, because of having a chemical high and parts of our brain being triggered to want that again, that can also be a factor, and a physical factor as well, but also an emotional factor. So we want to invite God into these things, invite God into those core feelings of worthlessness. Where did that start? Was it generational? Why do you feel unlovable? Were you told that? What does God say? Inviting him into those core memories. Alone. That was in my example earlier of my fear and feeling alone, and God showing me that he was with me. So where's the root of feeling alone? And then another factor with addictions is, and this is in the graphic, the addictive root, there's family dysfunction can feed into those things. Praying through freedom from generational bondage is helpful. Related to that, any occult bondage, any situational bondage, but also needing to learn new healthy patterns and having healthy community around us is an important part of that. Also, personal trauma can affect things. We may be living in pain and trying to manage that pain. And then our society has a lot of influences that can pull us in those directions. Commercials, neighborhoods, all kinds of different things. There's also the addictive cloak. Things like denial, shame, delusion, blame, someone else's fault. It's not really happening. I don't have a problem. Or I do, and I don't know what to do. So I need this addiction to manage my shame. So the Lord has a way out of all these things, addressing all of them. But like I said, this is a more complicated issue, and really good to have people to walk with and groups to help you with this.